I'd like to talk to you about two projects that I've been currently working on that are relevant to industry, especially in emerging economies like India's. No? The first one, which I've just completed, is a collaborative effort with my colleague Professor Nancy Galini at the University of British Columbia. Right? It has to do with what is referred to as antibiotic resistance. It's there's a crisis that's looming in the horizon pertaining to antibiotics. Now, all of you may know that antibiotics are the miracle drugs, discovered some 7 decades ago and could cure bacterial diseases. But the problem is that bacteria are living things, and therefore they can acquire resistance to the antibiotics that they are exposed to, which means that over time the bacteria are no longer affected by the antibiotics and they don't get killed by the drug, right? And there's a crisis looming because this means that we need to come up with new antibiotics to kind of cure bacterial diseases. The problem is that the pharmaceutical industries all over the world are not producing new antibiotics to deal with this problem. They're spending their research money on more profitable drugs like lifestyle drugs. And the project that I just completed with Nancy looks at this issue and asks why is this happening, because the consequences are very serious. Even a routine surgery is often followed by a common infection, and you need antibiotics to deal with these infections. And if you don't have antibiotics that work, you can't do these surgeries. So we've looked at this and we kind of trying to understand why it is that pharmaceutical companies are kind of backing out of antibiotics, and what policy measures the government can kind of implement to encourage pharmaceutical companies to kind of come up with new antibiotics. And another issue we've looked at is, how does the effect of competition in the industry help or hinder the problem of antibiotic resistance, and we come up with some surprising findings. So these, India has a very large pharmaceutical industry, so it's a project that's very relevant to all emerging economies because antibiotic resistance is a serious problem the world over, but it is particularly relevant to India because now, in fact, babies are being born that are resistant to all the available antibiotics. So if the newborn baby catches an infection, it's very difficult to treat that. So that's the first project. The second project I'd like to briefly talk about had the following research question. Is it possible for-profit business to alleviate extreme poverty? So by extreme poverty, I mean a person living on less than $1 a day, right? And in India, there are, hundreds of millions of people in dire poverty, right? That would be considered living in extreme poverty. Now, these people are typically bypassed by businesses for the simple reason that they are very poor and they cannot afford industrial products, right? And so the question is it possible for business to actually make profits while serving the extremely poor? Now, 15 years ago, C.K. Prahalad, a well-known academic in an American business school, proposed that what businesses are doing isn't quite right, because they don't seem to realize that even though the poor can't pay much individually, collectively there's a lot of purchasing power because there are so many of them. So he argued that there's actually a fortune to be made at the bottom of the pyramid, as he called it. And my research project, the one that I'm currently working on, is trying to examine the theoretical foundations of this claim. In other words, is it possible for a company that is strictly for-profit, not a charity, strictly for-profit business, can it make profits by serving the poor and thereby alleviating extreme poverty, right? So I've been looking at, a few cases around the world and also in India where businesses have managed to do precisely that they have made profits, and at the same time they have also alleviated poverty. So I'm trying to extract some general principles and then formulate a coherent framework in which one can think about this, right? So I believe a project of this sort is quite relevant to business in poor countries and certainly business in India.